Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that every citizen of the Imperium learns to dread, though most could never tell you exactly what it is until they hear it for themselves. It is not the shriek of an air raid siren, nor the distant thunder of orbital bombardment. It is something quieter, something far more personal. It is the sound of boots on metal grating, marching in perfect unison down the corridor outside your hab block at an hour when no one should be walking with that kind of purpose. It is the sharp, authoritative knock that follows, 3 strikes against Plastel, each one measured and deliberate. And it is the silence that comes after, the held breath of an entire floor of families who know that someone behind one of those thin walls has just been chosen for something from which there is no return. This is a story about that knock, about what comes before it, and everything that follows after. This is the story of what it means to be drafted into the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, the largest fighting force that humanity has ever assembled in all its long and bloody history. It is a story about ordinary people, men and women and sometimes children, who are barely old enough to hold a rifle, who are pulled from their lives and fed into the grinding machinery of a war that has lasted for 10,000 years and shows no sign of ever stopping. And if you will settle in and stay a while, we will walk through every step of that journey together. From the last quiet morning before the world changes forever, through the processing halls and the troop ships and the training fields, all the way to the muddy trenches and burning cities where the fate of humanity is decided one lasgun volley at a time. So let us begin where all such stories begin, with a life that someone thought was permanent, with a morning that felt like every other morning, with a person who had no idea that this was the last day they would ever call themselves a civilian. Picture a hive world, not one of the famous ones whose names echo through the archives of the Departamento Munitorum, but an ordinary one, the kind that does not merit its own entry in the great ledgers of the administratum, except as a line item, a string of numbers representing population density, manufacturing output, and tithe grade. Call it Caldera Primus, because the real name does not matter. What matters is the life that exists within its towering walls of ferrocrete and corroded steel. The hive rises from the surface of the planet like a mountain range, built by hands rather than tectonic forces. Its base covers an area the size of a small continent, and its peak disappears into the grey, polluted clouds that have not parted to reveal natural sunlight in living memory. Within its layered structure, something close to 14 billion human beings live, work, reproduce, and die. Most of them without ever seeing the sky or knowing what grass looks like outside of faded pit captures in children's primers. The upper spires belong to the nobility. Up there, behind gilded walls and climate-controlled environments, the planetary governor and his court play their games of politics and indulgence, in managing the world's affairs, with one eye on their own pleasures, and the other on the distant, ever-present threat of an administratum audit that could see them replaced overnight, or worse. The air in the upper spires is clean, filtered through systems that cost more to maintain than the annual food budget of an entire mid-hive district. The light is warm and golden, generated by lumen arrays designed to mimic the natural sunlight that the hive's own pollution has made impossible. The people who live up there eat real food, grown on agri-worlds and shipped across the stars at staggering expense, and they drink wine that has been aged in barrels made from wood, actual wood, harvested from forests that exist on planets these mid-hive workers will never visit. Below the spires, the hive descends through layers of decreasing privilege, like sediment in a jar of dirty water. The middle hive is where the administrative classes live, the scribes and overseers and minor officials who keep the vast machinery of imperial bureaucracy turning. Their hab blocks are modest but functional, with reliable power, running water that is only slightly recycled, and access to Medici facilities that can handle most common ailments. The people here consider themselves fortunate, and in relative terms, they are. They have enough to eat, a place to sleep, and the reasonable expectation that tomorrow will be much like today. But our story does not take place in the middle hive. Our story takes place further down, in the industrial districts, where the real work of the Imperium gets done. Down here, whilst the corridors are narrower and the ceilings are lower, stained with centuries of condensation and chemical residue. The air carries a permanent tang of machine oil, ozone, and the sour smell of too many human bodies packed too closely together. The lumen strips that line the corridors flicker and buzz, casting everything in a sickly yellowish light that makes healthy skin look jaundiced and sick skin look dead. This is where Kalen Voss lives. He is 23 standard Terran years old, though he looks older. Everyone down here looks older than they are. The air does it, the diet does it, the work does it. Kalen works 12-hour shifts at Manufactorum Sigma 7, one of the hundreds of factories that line the industrial levels of the hive, producing Laskel power packs for weapons he has never seen used in person. Often he stands at his station on the assembly line, performing the same series of motions over and over again, 6 days out of every 7, 50 weeks out of every 52. On his days off, he sleeps, eats whatever the rationing dispensaries are serving, and sometimes visits his mother in the Hab block, 2 levels down, where she has lived alone since his father died in a Manufactorum accident when Kalen was 11. His life is not good. He would be the first to tell you that. But it is his life, and it has a rhythm to it that he understands. Wake up, eat, work, eat again, sleep, repeat. There is comfort in repetition, even when the repetition is grinding. There is safety in knowing what tomorrow will look like, even when tomorrow looks exactly as bleak as today. The Imperium does not encourage its citizens to dream of better things. Ambition is suspect. Curiosity is dangerous. Contentment with one's station is the highest virtue a working citizen can aspire to, and the preachers of the imperial cult are very thorough in making sure everyone understands this. Kalen has heard of the Imperial Guard, of course. Everyone has. The propaganda picts that play on the communal viewing screens during meal breaks show heroic soldiers in gleaming armor, charging across sun-drenched battlefields with lasguns raised and glory in their eyes. The narrators speak of honor and duty and the privilege of serving the God Emperor in his eternal war against the enemies of mankind. The soldiers in the pics always look well-fed and confident, their uniforms crisp and their weapons shining. They always win. The enemies they face, the vague shapes in the background that are never shown too clearly, always fall before the righteous advance of the Imperium's finest. Kalen does not think about those picts very much. They are background noise, part of the endless stream of Imperial messaging that fills every public space in the hive. He knows that somewhere out there, beyond the smog-choked skies of his world, there are wars being fought. He knows that people from his hive have been sent to fight in those wars. He even knows, in the abstract way, that one knows about natural disasters happening on other continents, that many of those people do not come back. But these are distant truths, things that happen to other people in other places. They have nothing to do with him, nothing to do with his assembly line and his ration cards and his mother's hab block 2 levels down, until this morning. The first sign that something is different comes during the pre-shift muster, when Overseer Grath, a man whose emotional range usually spans the narrow spectrum between irritated and furious, addresses the workers with something that might, in a certain light, be mistaken for nervousness. He tells them that production quotas have been increased by 15%, effective immediately. He tells them that all scheduled maintenance downtime has been cancelled for the foreseeable future. And he tells them, almost as an afterthought, that there will be a planetary announcement on all Vox channels at the 18th hour. A planetary announcement. These are rare enough that most of the workers cannot remember the last one. Yet planetary announcements come from the governor's office and are reserved for events of significant import. The whispers begin almost immediately, spreading through the Manufactorum floor like ripples in still water. Some say there has been an attack somewhere in the system. Others claim that the tithe assessors have arrived early this cycle, which is never a good sign. A few of the older workers, the ones who have been through this before, say nothing at all, and the silence of those who know is always more frightening than the speculation of those who do not. Kalen works his shift. What else is there to do? The last cells pass through his station, one after another, and he performs his assigned operations on each one with the mechanical precision that 12 years of practice have made automatic. But his mind is elsewhere, as turning over possibilities like a man examining stones at the bottom of a stream, looking for something valuable and hoping not to find it. The announcement comes at the 18th hour, exactly as promised. It plays through every Vox speaker in the hive simultaneously, from the gilded salons of the upper spires to the trash-choked corridors of the underhive. The voice belongs to the planetary governor himself, though it sounds nothing like the smooth, confident tones of the man who occasionally appears on propaganda pics. This voice is strained, carefully controlled, reading from a prepared script with the deliberate cadence of someone who knows that every word is being monitored by powers far greater than himself. "Citizens of Caldera Primus," the voice says, "by order of the Departamento Munitorum, and acting under the authority of the High Lords of Terror, the imperial tithe for this world has been increased to exactis prima classification, effective immediately. In accordance with this sacred obligation, a founding of new regiments for the Astra Militarum has been authorized. All citizens between the ages of 16 and 45 standard Terran years who are not currently employed in essential Mechanicus-certified manufacturing roles are hereby subject to conscription review. Compliance is mandatory. The Emperor protects." The Vox cuts to static, then to the hymn of imperial duty, which plays on a loop for the next several hours. In the manufactorum, the workers stare at each other across the assembly line. Some of them are doing quick mental calculations, trying to figure out if their jobs qualify as essential Mechanicus certified manufacturing. Others are looking at the doors, as if they might run somewhere, though there is nowhere in a hive city that the administratum cannot reach. A few are praying, their lips moving silently as they mouth words that they have been taught to say in times of fear and uncertainty, though whether those words have ever been answered is a question that the imperial cult discourages asking. Kalen stands at his station and feels the floor shifting beneath him, not literally, but in that way that everything shifts when the fundamental assumptions of your life are suddenly revealed to be temporary. He is 23. He is not Mechanicus certified. His job on the assembly line is important, certainly, but it is the kind of important that can be done by anyone with 2 hands and basic motor function. There are millions of people in this hive who could replace him on the line without a single day's lost production. He is eligible. He knows this with a certainty that settles in his stomach like cold metal. The only question now is whether the net they cast will be wide enough to catch him, or whether he will slip through by some accident of bureaucratic chance, the way a small fish might pass through a hole in a trawler's net. But he has seen the size of the Imperium's nets before, in other contexts, and he knows that they are designed to catch everything. That night, in his hab block, Kalen does not sleep. He lies on his narrow cot and stares at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hive around him. The distant rumble of manufactorum machinery that never stops. The hiss and clank of water pipes carrying recycled fluid through the walls. The muffled sounds of other people in other rooms, living their own last normal night without knowing it. Somewhere below, in the underhive, there is the faint popping sound that might be gunfire or might be industrial equipment backfiring. Up here, you learn not to investigate sounds like that. He thinks about his mother. She is 58, outside the conscription age range, which means she will be safe from the draft itself. But she will be alone, and in a hive city, being alone is its own kind of danger. He thinks about the propaganda pics, the gleaming soldiers with their shining weapons, and tries to imagine himself among them. The image does not fit. He is thin, underfed. With the kind of pallid complexion that comes from a lifetime of artificial light. His hands are calloused from factory work, not from gripping a weapon. He has never been in a fight more serious than a scuffle over ration queue placement, and that was years ago. But the Imperium does not care about any of this. The Imperium does not need him to be strong or brave or skilled. The Imperium needs him to be present, to be a body that can hold a lasgun and stand in a line and absorb enemy fire while more valuable assets maneuver into position. The Imperium has been fighting its wars this way for 10,000 years, spending human lives the way other civilizations might spend ammunition, and the mathematics of this approach have been validated on more battlefields than any single mind could comprehend. One guardsman is nothing. A million guardsmen is a strategic asset. A billion guardsmen is the difference between holding a sector and losing it to the dark. 3 days later, the boots come marching down his corridor. 3 sharp knocks on his door, and when Kalen opens it, he finds himself looking at a face he will come to know very well in the weeks and months ahead, though he does not know it yet. It is the face of an administratum clerk, a thin woman in grey robes with data slate in hand, and the expression of someone who has done this so many times that the human element has long since ceased to register. Kalen Voss, identification number 774/Delta 9138, she says, reading from the slate without looking up. You have been selected for service in the Astra Militarum in fulfillment of the Imperial tithe. You will report to Processing Hall Gamma 12 at 0600 hours tomorrow. Failure to comply is a capital offense under Article 7 of the Lex Imperium. The Emperor protects. She does not wait for a response. She is already moving to the next door, where the next name on her list lives. Kalen stands in his doorway and watches her go, and he feels something that he will later recognize as the sensation of his old life ending. Not with a bang or a scream, but with the dry, efficient clicking of a stylus on a data slate and the rustle of grey administrative robes disappearing around a corner. This is how the draft works in the 41st millennium. Not with glory or ceremony, not with speeches about honor and duty, but with paperwork and legal threats and the quiet, relentless machinery of a bureaucracy so vast that it has become a force of nature, as impersonal and unstoppable as gravity itself. And this is where our story truly begins. To understand what is happening to Kalen, and to the hundreds of thousands of people across his world who are receiving similar visits on this same night, you need to understand the system that drives it. The Imperial tithe is not a suggestion. It is not a negotiation. It is the foundational obligation that every world in the Imperium owes to the God Emperor of mankind. The payment that buys continued protection and continued existence in a galaxy that would consume humanity without a moment's hesitation if given the chance. The system works like this. Every world in the Imperium is assessed by officials of the Administratum and the Departamento Munitorum as the vast logistical organization responsible for keeping the Astra Militarum supplied and operational. These officials evaluate the world's population, resources, industrial capacity, and strategic importance, and they assign it a tithe grade that determines how much it must contribute to the imperial war effort. The grades range from Salutio Tertius, the lightest burden assigned to worlds with small populations or limited resources, all the way up to Exactus Extremis, the highest level, which can demand such a staggering contribution of manpower and materials that entire hive cities are emptied to meet the quota. The military component of the tithe requires each eligible world to provide 1/10 of its total military force to the Astra Militarum. In practice, this means that the planetary governor must maintain a planetary defense force, a local military organization trained and equipped to defend the world against threats, and then periodically hand over a portion of that force to be shipped off-world and absorbed into the Guard. The soldiers taken this way are the lucky ones, relatively speaking. They have at least some training, some familiarity with weapons and tactics, some understanding of what they are getting into. But when the tithe grade is increased, When the wars of the Imperium demand more bodies than the standard system can provide, the net is cast wider, much wider, and that is when conscription begins in earnest. On a hive world like Caldera Primus, with its billions of inhabitants and its deep reserves of untapped manpower, a conscription drive is a massive operation. Departamento Munitorum officials arrive on the world in ships that look more like mobile filing cabinets than military vessels. Their holds filled not with weapons but with data slates and processing equipment and the forms, the endless forms, that the administratum requires for every transaction, no matter how mundane. These officials work with the planetary governor's administration, though work with is a generous description. In reality, the Munitorum tells the governor what is needed, and the governor complies, because the alternative to compliance is a death sentence, and not just for the governor personally, but potentially for the entire ruling structure of the world. The selection process varies wildly from world to world. On highly militarized planets like Cadia, where every citizen is trained for combat from the moment they can walk, and where serving in the Guard is considered a sacred honor, the process is almost voluntary. Entire populations compete for the privilege of being chosen, and those who are not selected feel genuine shame. The Cadian shock troops, widely regarded as the standard against which all other Imperial Guard regiments are measured, are products of this culture. Soldiers who are born and raised for war, the way other people are born and raised for farming or manufacturing. On Vostroya, a forge world in the frozen northern reaches of the galaxy, the tithe takes a different form. Every firstborn son of every family is given to the Guard, a tradition that dates back to the Horus heresy, when Vostroya refused to send troops to aid the Emperor and has been atoning for that failure ever since. The Vostroyan firstborn marched to war with ornate handcrafted weapons and a proud bearing that belies the bitterness of their obligation, for they are not volunteers. They are the price of an ancient sin, paid forward across the millennia. On death worlds like Katakan, where the planet itself is a weapon that kills the unwary, with everything from carnivorous plants to predatory insects the size of ground cars, the Guard does not need to draft anyone. The people of Katakan are already the deadliest fighters in the Imperium by the simple virtue of having survived childhood on their hellish homeworld. Recruitment there is less a conscription drive and more a selection process, where the best of the already deadly are chosen for off-world service. But on an ordinary hive world, where the population is vast and the individual citizens are interchangeable cogs in a manufacturing machine, the process is far blunter. There is no honor in it, no tradition, no proud send-off. There is only the data slate and the door knock and the quiet, efficient machinery of the state claiming what it considers rightfully its own. It is worth pausing here to note something that the propaganda Picts never mention and the imperial cult actively suppresses. The tithe is not a contract. It is not an agreement between equals. It is the demand of a civilization that views its citizens primarily as resources to be allocated according to need. The Imperium does not ask for your service, it takes it. And the bureaucratic language that surrounds the process, the talk of sacred obligations and holy duty, is a veneer of ceremony laid over what is, in its essence, the organized seizure of human lives. Failure to comply with the tithe is punishable by death. Not just the death of the individual who refuses, but potentially the death of their entire family, their community, their world. Planetary governors who fail to meet their tithe obligations are executed, and their worlds are subjected to regime changes that make the process even more brutal for the population. In extreme cases, entire hive cities have been cleared out, their populations forcibly marched to processing centers and shipped off-world at gunpoint. With those too old or too sick to serve, assigned to penal labor battalions, or simply left to fend for themselves in the empty ruins of their former homes. This is the system that Kalen Voss has been caught in. Not because he did anything wrong, not because he failed in some duty or committed some offense. Simply because he exists, He is of suitable age, and his world owes a debt that can only be paid in blood. Processing Hall Gamma 12 is a converted manufactorum near the Hive's primary transit hub. It was producing water recycling components as recently as last week. Now, its assembly lines have been pushed to the walls and replaced with rows of metal tables where administratum clerks sit behind stacks of data slates, processing the steady stream of conscripts who file through the hall's wide doors with the numb and shuffling gait of people who have not yet fully grasped what is happening to them. Kalen arrives at 0545, 15 minutes before his appointed time, because the one thing that every citizen of the Imperium understands instinctively is that you do not keep the administratum waiting. He joins a queue that already stretches halfway around the building, a long line of men and women in workers' coveralls and hab-block casual wear, most of them carrying small bags containing whatever personal items they thought to bring. Some of them are talking in low voices, sharing rumors and speculation. Others stand in silence, their faces blank with the kind of shock that settles in when reality has outpaced the mind's ability to process it. The queue moves slowly but steadily, a feeding into the hall through doors that open and close with mechanical regularity. When Kalen finally reaches the front, he is directed to a table where a clerk, a different one from the woman who knocked on his door, takes his identification papers and begins the process of converting him from a citizen into a soldier. The process is thorough and utterly dehumanizing. His name is recorded alongside a new designation, a Departamento Munitorum identification number that will follow him for the rest of his life, however long that turns out to be. His physical characteristics are catalogued with clinical precision: height, weight, eye color, distinguishing marks. A medici servitor, a thing that was once partly human but is now mostly machine, takes blood samples and performs a battery of basic health checks. But anyone found to be carrying diseases or genetic abnormalities that fall outside acceptable parameters is pulled from the line and sent to a separate processing stream, the destination of which no one discusses. Those who pass the medical screening are moved to the next station, where they are issued their first piece of Imperial Guard equipment, a small book bound in cheap cardstock with a golden aquila stamped on the cover. This is the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer, and it is the single most important document that a new guardsman will ever receive, at least according to the Departamento Munitorum, which published it. The primer contains everything that the Munitorum believes a soldier needs to know, from basic weapons maintenance to field hygiene to the proper prayers to recite before, during, and after combat. It also contains detailed information about the enemies of the Imperium, though the accuracy of this information ranges from somewhat misleading to dangerously wrong, a fact that the Munitorum either does not know or does not care about. Kalen receives his primer from a bored-looking clerk who tells him that losing or defacing the book is a punishable offense, that he should read it cover to cover at the earliest opportunity, and that the information within it will save his life. The clerk says this with the flat, rehearsed delivery of someone who has said the same words 10,000 times and has long since stopped believing them. The next station is where the real transformation begins. Kalen is told to remove his civilian clothes and place them in a bin. He is given a set of standard issue fatigues, but rough cloth in a muted olive-brown color that seems designed to be as uncomfortable as possible, while still technically qualifying as clothing. He is given boots that are slightly too large, because the Munitorum produces boots in bulk sizes and does not waste resources on individual fittings. He is given undergarments, socks, and a belt with a simple metal buckle stamped with the aquila. And then, standing in his new clothes, with his civilian identity folded up in a bin that will be disposed of before the day is over, Kalen is directed through a final doorway into a large holding area where hundreds of other newly processed conscripts stand in uncertain clusters, all of them wearing the same ill-fitting clothes and the same expression of dazed incomprehension. They are no longer citizens. They are not yet soldiers. They are something in between, raw material that has been extracted from one life and has not yet been shaped into something useful for the next. There is no ceremony, no speech, no moment where an officer stands before them and explains what is happening or what will happen next. The Imperium has found, through 10,000 years of experience, that ceremonies are inefficient. Speeches raise expectations that reality cannot meet. It is better, from a logistical standpoint, to keep the new conscripts in a state of confusion and passivity until they have been transported off-world and can be properly indoctrinated under controlled conditions. Kalen stands in the holding area and waits. He waits because there is nothing else to do. He did not get to say goodbye to his mother. There was no time, and even if there had been, well, what would he have said? I am being taken away to fight in a war I do not understand, on a world I have never heard of, against enemies I cannot imagine, and I will almost certainly never come back. The truth is too heavy for a farewell. Better to let the silence say what words cannot. Around him, the holding area fills with more and more conscripts as the processing lines do their work. By midday, there are thousands of them packed into the space, and the air has taken on the close, oppressive quality of too many bodies breathing in a room that was not designed for this purpose. Some of the conscripts have begun to talk to each other, forming the tentative, fragile bonds that strangers make when they are thrown together by circumstance. Others sit alone, their eyes fixed on nothing, on already beginning the long process of withdrawing into themselves that will define much of their experience in the months to come. Late in the afternoon, the first transports arrive. They come in through the hive's cargo loading bays, massive tracked vehicles with open beds that were designed for hauling industrial materials. The conscripts are loaded into these transports in batches of several hundred, packed standing up like factory components being shipped to a warehouse. There are no seats, no handholds, no safety equipment of any kind. The transports rumble through the hive's industrial corridors toward the surface ports, and the conscripts hold on to each other for balance, swaying with the motion of the vehicles like stalks of grain in a wind they cannot see, for many of them, or this is the first time they have ever traveled more than a few levels from their home hab blocks. The hive is all they have ever known, and even this modest journey through its interior levels feels like an expedition into foreign territory. The corridors look different down here, wider and more utilitarian, designed for the movement of bulk cargo rather than foot traffic. The air smells different too, carrying new chemical signatures that their lungs do not recognize. Every sense is telling them that they are moving away from everything familiar, and every instinct is screaming at them to go back. But there is no going back. There never was, and there never will be. The system that has claimed them is a one-way mechanism, and it has been functioning without interruption for longer than anyone currently alive can remember. The Imperium takes what it needs, and what it needs right now is soldiers. Everything else, their fears, their families, their former lives, is irrelevant to the calculus of survival that drives the greatest war machine in human history.
I want to take a quick second here to just say something personal. This is one of the things that I think makes 40K so compelling as a setting. A lot of sci-fi gives you the hero's perspective, the chosen one, the space marine, the guy with the special destiny. But the guard flips that completely. You are nobody. You are a number. And somehow that makes the stories hit 10 times harder because we all know what it feels to be a small person caught up in something way bigger than ourselves. And I think that is why guard stories resonate with people more than space marine stories a lot of the time. There's something painfully real about a normal person just trying to survive and doing their best with terrible tools in a terrible situation and still finding reasons to keep going. This is not science fiction, this is just life turned up to 11. But anyways, let's get back to the video.
The surface port is a vast expanse of ferrocrete stretching to the haze-obscured horizon, its surface scarred by the landing burns of countless ships. The sky above it is the color of dirty brass, choked with the perpetual smog that every hive world produces as a byproduct of its existence. For Kalen, who has never been above the hive's industrial levels, the sight of the open sky, even a sky as ugly as this one, is overwhelming. The sheer scale of it, the knowledge that there is nothing above him but air and clouds and the void of space beyond, triggers a visceral reaction that he was not prepared for. His breathing quickens, his hands shake, he feels simultaneously tiny and exposed, like an insect on a dinner plate. He is not alone in this reaction. All around him, conscripts who have spent their entire lives in the enclosed spaces of the hive are experiencing the same thing. Some of them are openly weeping. Others have gone rigid, their bodies locked in the paralysis of sensory overload. A few have begun to pray, reciting the words of the Imperial Catechism with the desperate fervor of people who are grasping for any anchor in a suddenly anchorless world. And above the port, hanging in the poisoned sky like a cathedral made of metal and malice, is the troop ship that will carry them away from everything they have ever known. It is massive. The word does not begin to describe it. It blots out a portion of the sky, casting a shadow that falls across the port like a stain. Its hull is scarred and pitted from countless passages through the void, its surface covered with the Gothic architecture that the Imperium favors for all its vessels, arches and buttresses and gargoyles, that would look more at home on a place of worship than on a military transport. Shuttlecraft move around it like insects around a carcass, ferrying supplies and personnel between the ship and the surface in an endless cycle of loading and unloading. Kalen stares up at it and feels something that he will later identify as the moment when abstract knowledge became visceral understanding. He knew, intellectually, that there was a galaxy beyond his world. He knew that ships traveled between the stars. Yet he knew these things the way one knows that the sun exists, even when you have never seen it. But knowing and understanding are different animals, and the sight of that ship, that vast, impossible, terrifying machine, hanging above him like the hand of a god, reaching down to pluck him from his life, makes the understanding land in his bones with the force of a physical blow. They are loaded onto shuttles in groups of several hundred, herded up ramps by Munitorum personnel, who manage the flow of bodies with the practiced efficiency of livestock handlers, which, in a sense, is exactly what they are. The shuttle interiors are bare metal, with fold-down benches along the walls and overhead straps for those who cannot find a seat. There are no windows. When the ramp closes and the engines fire, the only indication that they have left the ground is the sudden, stomach-dropping sensation of acceleration and the vibration that runs through the metal floor like the heartbeat of something enormous and alive. The shuttle docks with the troop ship, and the conscripts are disgorged into a receiving bay that smells of disinfectant, machine oil, and the accumulated sweat of thousands of previous occupants who pass through this same space on their way to their own private fates. From here, they are directed through corridors that seem to go on forever, deeper and deeper into the ship's interior, until they reach the berthing decks, vast open spaces lined with bunks stacked 4 high, each one barely wide enough to accommodate a grown adult lying on their side. Kalen finds a bunk, climbs into it, and lies still. Yet the metal is cold against his back. The air is recycled and carries a faint chemical taste that he cannot identify. Above him, the ceiling is close enough to touch, pipes and conduits running across it in patterns that suggest the ship's systems were designed by someone who valued function over form. Around him, the sounds of thousands of displaced lives fill the space. Voices talking, people crying, the shuffle of bodies finding their places in this new, unwanted home. Somewhere beneath his feet, the engines of the troop ship begin to rumble with gathering power. The ship is preparing to leave orbit, to carry its cargo of newly made soldiers away from the only world they have ever known and into the dark between the stars. And somewhere in the back of Kalen's mind, beneath the fear and the confusion and the grief, a small, her quiet voice asks the question that every conscript in every army, in every age of human history, has asked themselves at this moment. How did it come to this? The answer, of course, is simple. It came to this the way everything in the Imperium comes to this, through the slow, inexorable turning of a machine so vast and so old that individual lives are not even rounding errors in its calculations. through a tithe system that treats human beings as fungible resources, interchangeable units of labor and combat potential to be allocated according to the needs of an empire that spans 1,000,000 worlds. Through a bureaucracy that has been running on autopilot for millennia, following procedures laid down by people who died so long ago that their names have been forgotten, processing forms and filing reports with the mindless, a mechanical devotion of a servitor that has lost its sense of self but retained its ability to perform its assigned task. Kalen is not special. He is not chosen. He is not the hero of a story or the subject of a prophecy. He is a line item on a data slate, a number in a quota, a body that will fill a uniform and hold a weapon and stand in a line and do whatever it is told to do until it is no longer capable of doing those things. And when that happens, when the body stops working, there will be another body to replace it, and another after that, and another after that, drawn from the bottomless reserves of humanity's billion worlds. This is the truth of the Imperial Guard. Not glory, not honor, not the shining heroism of the propaganda picts. Just the quiet and grinding reality of a system that consumes lives the way a furnace consumes fuel, steadily and without sentiment, for the sole purpose of keeping the fires burning for one more day. The journey through the warp is something that no amount of preparation can adequately describe, and the uplifting primer certainly does not try. The primer mentions warp travel in a single paragraph, describing it as a blessed transition facilitated by the Emperor's divine light, and advising soldiers to maintain a positive attitude and trust in the ship's crew and the God Emperor's protection. It says nothing about the dreams. Warp travel requires a ship to leave the material universe and enter an alternate dimension of pure psychic energy, while a roiling sea of emotion and thought that exists alongside reality, the way a shadow exists alongside the object that casts it. This dimension, called the Imperium, or simply the warp, is not empty. It is inhabited by entities that feed on human emotion and human suffering, beings that the imperial cult calls demons, and that the Inquisition has spent 10,000 years trying to understand and contain. The only thing that keeps a ship safe during warp transit is its Geller field, a bubble of reality generated by ancient technology that surrounds the vessel and keeps the inhabitants of the warp from flooding in. When the Geller field is working properly, warp travel is merely deeply unpleasant. The ship creaks and groans as if the metal itself is under strain. The lights flicker. Temperature fluctuations occur without warning. Whole sections of the ship going from comfortable to freezing to uncomfortably warm within minutes. And the dreams come, vivid and disturbing, filled with images and sounds and sensations that seem to come from somewhere outside the dreamer's own mind. Some people see faces they do not recognize. Others hear voices speaking in languages they have never learned. A few experience more extreme effects, waking up screaming from nightmares that they cannot describe, or sleepwalking through corridors they do not remember entering. When the Geller field is not working properly, things get much worse. But that is a story for another time, and one that the Munitorum prefers not to think about, let alone discuss. For Kalen and the other conscripts aboard the troopship, the warp transit lasts approximately 3 weeks. Though time in the warp is unreliable, and the actual duration may be longer or shorter than the ship's chronometers record. During this time, they are confined to the berthing decks and the adjacent common areas, a handful of large rooms equipped with metal benches and vox speakers that play the hymn of imperial duty on a constant loop. They are fed twice a day from communal serving stations, the meals consisting of corpse starch rations, nutrient-dense blocks of processed organic matter whose name does not bear thinking about too carefully, and recaf, the Imperium's ubiquitous caffeinated beverage, which tastes like someone dissolved a boot in hot water and then added a chemical sweetener that makes the aftertaste even worse. The conditions are cramped, uncomfortable, and deliberately Spartan. The Munitorum has found that the transit period serves as a useful first stage of indoctrination, breaking down the conscripts' civilian identities through a combination of discomfort, disorientation, and the constant, low-grade stress of living in an environment that is just unpleasant enough to prevent anyone from getting truly comfortable. By the time the ship exits the warp and reaches its destination, the conscripts are already partially conditioned, their old lives beginning to feel distant and unreal, their resistance to authority eroded by weeks of powerlessness and dependence. Kalen adapts, as well as anyone can be expected to adapt, which is to say that he survives and does not lose his mind, which is more than some of his fellow conscripts manage. In the first week alone, 3 people from his berthing section are found dead in their bunks. Causes unknown, but suspected to be related to the psychological stress of the transition. Several others have to be physically restrained after suffering episodes of panic or psychosis, their screams echoing through the metal corridors in the small hours when the ship's lumen strips are dimmed to simulate nighttime. One man, a factory worker from a level not far from Kalen's own, refuses to eat and sits in the corner of his bunk space, rocking back and forth and muttering prayers that gradually degenerate into a meaningless stream of syllables before he falls silent altogether. The ship's crew and the Munitorum personnel do nothing about any of this. They have seen it before. They will see it again. The losses during transit are expected and factored into the overall personnel calculations. If the Munitorum tithed 100,000 conscripts from Caldera Primus, and 5% of them die or become non-functional during the journey, that is within acceptable parameters. The remaining 95,000 will be sufficient for the purpose intended. During the transit, informal social structures begin to form among the conscripts. People from the same hab blocks or the same manufactorum districts gravitate toward each other, forming small groups that provide mutual support and a semblance of the community that was taken from them. These groups are not discouraged by the ship's authorities, partly because they help maintain order, and partly because the Munitorum knows that soldiers who have formed bonds with their comrades fight harder and break less easily than soldiers who are entirely alone. The guard may be a meat grinder, but even a meat grinder works better when the components hold together. Kalen finds himself drawn into one such group, a collection of about a dozen workers from the industrial levels who share a section of the berthing deck. There is Sarah, a woman a few years older than him, who worked in a textile mill and has the steady hands and quiet confidence of someone who has been solving practical problems her entire life. There is Baroch, a large, slow-speaking man from the water recycling plants who seems perpetually confused by his circumstances, but whose physical size alone provides a certain reassurance. There is Tesh, a teenager who lied about his age to avoid being sent to a juvenile processing stream and whose false bravado barely conceals the terror of a child in an adult's situation. And there are others, names and faces that Kalen is beginning to learn, each one carrying their own version of the same story. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives. They were taken, and now they are here, hurtling through a dimension of nightmares in a metal box, headed for a place they cannot imagine to fight an enemy they have never seen. This is the draft in the 41st millennium. Not a call to arms, not a summons to glory, just a vast, yet impersonal machine doing what it has always done, reaching into the lives of ordinary people and pulling them out, one by one, to feed the endless hunger of a war that will never end. The ship drops out of the warp with a shudder that runs through its hull like the last convulsion of a dying animal. The transition from the Imperium to real space is always violent, the ship seeming to contract and expand simultaneously as it pushes through the barrier between dimensions. Conscripts who were sleeping are thrown from their bunks. Those who were standing are knocked off their feet. The lights go out for a few seconds, and in that darkness, someone screams, a sound that is immediately swallowed by the groan of the ship's superstructure settling back into normal physics. When the lights come back on and the Vox speakers crackle to life, The voice that addresses them is not the bored drone of a Munitorum clerk. It is harder, sharper, carrying the clipped authority of someone who expects to be obeyed immediately and without question. Attention, all personnel. This is Commissar Aldrin Holt. Welcome to the Callus system. You are now under the jurisdiction of the 47th Combined Founding. You will receive your assignments and begin training within the hour. Any man or woman who fails to comply with orders, who attempts to desert, or who demonstrates cowardice in any form will be executed. There will be no warnings. There will be no appeals. The Emperor protects. And just like that, the transition is complete. They are no longer conscripts in transit. They are soldiers, or at least the raw material from which soldiers will be made. And the process of making them, or of transforming frightened civilians into something that can stand on a battlefield without immediately breaking, is about to begin. The training camp is established on a barren moon orbiting the fourth planet of the Callus system, a world of grey dust and thin atmosphere that requires the conscripts to wear rebreather masks whenever they are outside the pressurized training barracks. The moon was chosen for this purpose precisely because it is inhospitable, the Munitorum having determined long ago that training conducted in comfortable conditions produces soldiers who expect comfort, and expectations of comfort are a liability in the Imperial Guard. The training is brutal, abbreviated, and focused on the absolute minimum that a soldier needs to know in order to function on a battlefield. It bears almost no resemblance to the rigorous, but multi-year programs that produce the elite troops of regiments like the Cadian Shock Troops or the Tempestus Scions. Those are professional soldiers, born and bred for war, their training beginning in childhood and continuing throughout their careers. Conscripts do not receive that kind of attention. Conscripts receive what the Munitorum calls foundational combat instruction, which translates to approximately 6 to 8 weeks of learning how not to kill yourself with your own weapon, how to march in something approximating formation, and how to follow orders without thinking, the last being arguably the most important skill of all. The instructors are a mix of Guard veterans and Munitorum drill personnel, men and women who have survived enough combat to know what a soldier needs to know and who have been assigned to training duties either as a reward for long service or as a punishment for some minor infraction that the commissariat deemed insufficient for execution but too serious for a reprimand. They are, without exception, the hardest, most unforgiving people that Kalen has ever encountered. They scream, they strike, they assign punishments that seem designed to test the limits of human endurance rather than to correct specific deficiencies. And they do all of this with a matter-of-fact brutality that suggests they genuinely believe it is the kindest thing they can do for the people under their charge. Because, in a terrible way, it is. The alternative to harsh training is sending untrained soldiers into combat. And untrained soldiers die faster and in greater numbers than trained ones. Every drill instructor knows this. Every one of them has seen what happens when a conscript who does not know how to maintain their weapon has it jam at a critical moment, or when a squad that has not practiced movement under fire bunches up in the open and provides the enemy with a target so inviting that even the most inaccurate fire cannot miss. The screaming and the striking and the punishments are not cruelty for its own sake. They are the compressed, concentrated essence of a training system that does not have the luxury of time or gentleness, a system that must transform a frightened factory worker into a functional combatant in less than 2 months, and accepts that some percentage of the raw material will break under the pressure. The day begins before dawn, or what passes for dawn on a moon with no natural light cycle, which is to say that the lumen strips in the barracks switch from dim red to harsh white at 0400 hours, and the drill instructors come through, screaming at a volume that makes sleep a physical impossibility. The conscripts have 10 minutes to dress, make their bunks to the exacting standard described in the uplifting primer, and assemble in the parade ground outside, where they stand in formation for inspection while the dust of the moon settles on their uniforms like grey snow. Physical conditioning takes up the first 3 hours of the day, running, climbing, crawling through obstacle courses that seem designed by someone who hates the human body and wants to punish it for existing, push-ups, sit-ups, and various other exercises whose names vary from regiment to regiment, but whose purpose is universal. Building the kind of baseline physical fitness that will allow a soldier to march for hours under load, to sprint short distances under fire, and to continue functioning after minimal sleep and inadequate food, which is to say the default condition of a guardsman in the field. Kalen struggles with the physical demands. He is not weak. Years of factory work have given him the wiry strength of someone who has spent their life performing repetitive manual labor. But he is not fit in the way that the training demands, and the first few weeks are an unending parade of muscle cramps, blisters, and the deep, bone-level exhaustion that comes from pushing a body beyond what it has been conditioned to handle. He is not alone in this, and everyone around him is struggling, gasping and stumbling through exercises that would have been trivial for soldiers raised on worlds where physical training begins in childhood. After physical conditioning comes weapons training, and this is where the lasgun enters the story. The lasgun, the weapon that defines the Imperial Guard more than any other piece of equipment, more than the flak armor or the Chimera transport or the mighty Lehman Russ battle tank. The lasgun is the weapon that trillions of soldiers carry into battle every day across every war zone in the Imperium, and it is both the guardsman's best friend and the target of more jokes than any other weapon in human history. The version issued to the conscripts of the 47th Combined Founding is the Cantrail pattern. Mark IV, a sturdy, reliable weapon that has been in continuous production for over 300 years. It is approximately 1 meter long, weighing just under 3 kilograms without a power pack, and its construction is simple enough that it can be manufactured by relatively low-tech facilities on almost any Imperial world. The power pack that feeds it provides approximately 150 shots of standard intensity las fire before it needs to be recharged or replaced, and recharging can be accomplished by plugging it into any standard power source or, in an emergency, by placing it in a fire, a feature that makes the lasgun arguably the most logistically friendly weapon ever devised. In terms of lethality, the lasgun fires a focused beam of light energy that, at standard intensity, is more than sufficient to blow a limb clean off an unarmored human target. This makes it a devastating weapon against the kinds of enemies that the Imperial Guard most commonly faces: rebels, cultists, and other lightly armed opponents who make up the bulk of the Imperium's internal threats. Against more heavily armored targets, the Orcs and Chaos Marines and alien horrors that populate the galaxy's worst war zones, a single lasgun shot is less impressive. But the Guard does not fight with single shots. The Guard fights with volleys, hundreds or thousands of lasguns firing together in disciplined salvos that can bring down even heavily armored targets through sheer volume of fire. The training focuses on the basics: how to hold the weapon, how to aim it, how to fire it without flinching, or, which turns out to be surprisingly difficult, when the weapon produces a sharp crack of superheated air and a flash of light with every shot. How to change a power pack quickly and smoothly, a skill that can mean the difference between life and death in a sustained firefight. How to clear the most common malfunctions, which are few because the lasgun is remarkably reliable, but catastrophic when they occur because a malfunctioning power pack can explosively vent its stored energy directly into the user's face. How to maintain the weapon, cleaning and inspecting it daily, according to the procedures laid out in the uplifting primer, which devotes an entire chapter to lasgun maintenance and assigns punishments ranging from extra duty to summary execution for various forms of negligence, and arranged in a hierarchy that suggests the Munitorum considers a dirty barrel approximately equivalent to minor blasphemy, and how to attach a bayonet, because in the 41st Millennium, even a weapon that fires concentrated beams of light is sometimes not enough, and the Guard expects its soldiers to be capable of fighting at close quarters with sharpened metal, a prospect that fills every conscript with a particular kind of dread that no amount of training can fully dispel. Kalen learns. He has no choice but to learn. The alternative to learning is failing, and the alternative to failing is punishment, and the punishments escalate in severity until they reach a terminal point that the commissar has made very clear. He learns to field strip and reassemble the laser gun in under 60 seconds. He learns to fire from standing, kneeling, and prone positions with reasonable accuracy at distances up to 200 meters. He learns to move with his squad, advancing by bounds, one element providing covering fire while the other moves forward, a tactic so basic that it is the first thing taught and the last thing many soldiers ever need. He also learns to wear flak armor, which is issued during the third week of training along with the rest of the standard guardsman's kit. Flak armor is the Imperial Guard's answer to the problem of keeping soldiers alive long enough to be useful, and it manages this task with the efficient mediocrity that characterizes everything the Munitorum produces. It consists of a vest, a helmet, shoulder pads, and armored plates for the forearms and shins, all made from layers of high-tensile fabric wrapped around a skeleton of lightweight metal and finished with a hardened outer shell. In terms of protection, flak armor is remarkably effective against the enemies that the Guard faces most often. It can reliably stop shrapnel, stub-round projectiles, and even glancing hits from las weapons at range. Against the kind of enemies that feature in the average citizen's nightmares, the Orcs with their massive caliber slugger weapons, the Chaos Marines with their rocket-propelled explosive bolter rounds, the Tyranids with their bioacid and scything talons, it provides about as much protection as a stern expression and a prayer. But the Guard does not issue flak armor because it expects the armor to save soldiers. It issues flak armor because a soldier who believes they have some protection fights harder and lasts longer than a soldier who knows they have none. And in a war measured in attrition rates, every additional second of combat effectiveness is worth the manufacturing cost. The rest of the kit rounds out the picture of a guardsman's material existence. A rucksack for carrying personal equipment and rations. An entrenching tool for digging the foxholes and trenches that will become home. A water canteen with built-in purification tablets. 4 days' worth of ration packs, each one containing enough caloric content to keep a human body functioning at a minimal level, if not at a level that anyone would describe as comfortable. A personal Vox bead for squad-level communications. A las pistol, as smaller and less powerful than the laser gun, but useful as a backup weapon. A combat knife, multi-purpose and not particularly sharp. 6 power packs for the laser gun, and the primer, always the primer, tucked into its designated pocket on the rucksack, where it can be accessed quickly for reference or, in extreme circumstances, used as a makeshift fire starter, a fact that the primer itself would certainly not approve of. This is what the Imperium gives a soldier. This is the sum total of what stands between a newly drafted guardsman and the horrors of a galaxy that has been trying to kill humanity for longer than recorded history. And it is supposed to be enough. The weeks of training blur together into a single extended memory of exhaustion, repetition, and gradually diminishing fear. Not that the fear goes away entirely, it does not, but it changes shape, evolving from the raw, paralyzing terror of the first days into something more manageable, a low-grade anxiety that sits in the background of every waking moment and provides a constant, unwanted companion. The conscripts learn to function with this fear the way they learn to function with sore muscles and insufficient sleep, not by overcoming it, but by accommodating it, making room for it alongside all the other discomforts that have become their new normal. The transformation is not dramatic. There is no single moment when the frightened civilians become soldiers. It happens gradually through the accumulation of small changes that are individually insignificant but collectively profound. They learn to move together, not with the precision of a parade ground formation, but with the rough, practical coordination of people who have figured out that staying close to their squad mates increases their chances of survival. They learn the rhythms of military life, the cycle of meals and drills and duties that replaces the factory shift cycle they used to know. They learn the language, the jargon, and slang and technical terms that every military develops as a kind of shorthand for concepts that civilian vocabulary cannot adequately express. And they learn the thing that no one talks about, but everyone understands, the fundamental bargain that lies at the heart of the Imperial Guard. You do not fight for the Imperium because you believe in it, though some do. You do not fight for the Emperor because you love him, though many would say they do. You fight for the people standing next to you, the soldiers who share your trench and your rations and your fear, because they are the only thing in this vast, indifferent universe that gives a damn whether you live or die. Kalen understands this. He understands it the way he understands the operation of his lasgun, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical truth that has been beaten into him through weeks of shared misery. The people in his squad, Sarah and Baruch and Tesh and the others, are the closest thing he has to family now. They are not his friends, not exactly. Friendship implies a level of choice and leisure that military life does not permit. They are something more fundamental than friends. They are the people he will depend on to keep him alive, and who will depend on him in return. And the weight of that mutual obligation is more binding than any contract or oath. The training ends with a field exercise that lasts 3 days and simulates, in broad terms, the kind of conditions that the conscripts will face in actual combat. They march across the moon's barren surface, carrying full kit, sleeping in foxholes they dig with their entrenching tools, eating cold rations because heating them would give away their position to the opposing force, a company of more experienced soldiers playing the role of the enemy. They are ambushed, shelled with smoke rounds that simulate artillery, and forced to assault a fortified position that has been built specifically to be as difficult to take as possible. It is not real combat. No one dies. No one even gets seriously injured, though there are the usual assortment of sprains, cuts, and heat exhaustion cases that any field exercise produces. But it is close enough to real combat that the conscripts get a taste of what is coming, the fear, the confusion, the overwhelming desire to be somewhere, anywhere, other than where they are. And it is close enough that when the exercise ends and the drill instructors tell them that they have passed and are now officially soldiers of the Astra Militarum, the conscripts feel something that they did not expect. They feel ready. Not confident, not eager, but ready, in the way that a person who has been told they must jump from a great height feels ready when they finally step to the edge and look down. The fear is still there, but it has been joined by something else, a grim, practical determination that comes from knowing what is expected of you and believing, however uncertainly, that you can do it. Kalen stands in formation with his squad and listens as Commissar Holt addresses the assembled regiment for the first time since their arrival. The Commissar is a tall, lean man with a face that looks like it was carved from the same grey rock as the moon they are standing on, all sharp angles and deep shadows, with eyes that seem to evaluate everything they fall upon and find it consistently wanting. He wears the distinctive peaked cap and long greatcoat of his office, a bolt pistol at his hip and a chainsword across his back, and he speaks with the quiet, measured certainty of a man who has never questioned his own authority and sees no reason to start now. Soldiers of the 47th Combined Founding, Holt says, you have completed your training. You are now guardsmen of the Astra Militarum, servants of the God Emperor, heirs and defenders of humanity. I will not lie to you about what lies ahead. You will face enemies that are stronger than you, better armed than you, and more numerous than you. Many of you will die. This is the nature of the service you have been called to perform. But I tell you this, the Emperor does not ask you to win. He asks you to stand, to hold the line, to do your duty. And the man or woman who does their duty, who fights and dies in the service of the Imperium, has achieved something that no amount of comfort or safety could ever provide. They have earned the right to be called a soldier, and in the eyes of the Emperor, there is no higher honor. It is, Kalen reflects, a speech that manages to be simultaneously inspiring and terrifying, which is probably exactly what it is designed to be. Well, the Commissar is not trying to make them feel good. He is trying to prepare them for reality, to set their expectations at a level where the actual experience of combat will not break them simply by being worse than they imagined. It is a calibration, precise and deliberate, and it works because Holt clearly believes every word he is saying. The regiment is loaded onto the troopship once more, and this time the destination is not a training ground. It is a war zone. And this is where the real story begins. Everything that came before, the knock on the door, the processing, the transit, the training, all of it was prologue. Preparation for the moment when a newly minted guardsman steps off a landing craft onto alien soil and discovers, in the most immediate and personal way possible, what it means to be at war. As the planet is called Kesrin's Fall, and the name is appropriate. Kesrin was a Lord General who committed the planet to a failed defense against an Orc invasion 3 standard years ago, and the Fall refers to both his death and the planet's subsequent collapse into a state of continuous warfare. The Orcs came, as Orcs always do, in numbers that stagger the imagination. Their fleet was a motley collection of scavenged vessels, ramshackle asteroids fitted with engines and weapons, and ships that defied classification by any known Imperial taxonomy. They crashed into the planet's defenses like a green tide breaking against a seawall, and when the seawall broke, they poured through in their millions. 3 years of fighting have not dislodged them. The planet's original defenders, was a collection of planetary defense force units and 2 understrength guard regiments, have been ground down to a fraction of their initial strength, fighting a retreating action across the planet's northern continent that has cost hundreds of thousands of lives and gained the Imperium precisely nothing. The Orcs have dug in, literally, constructing massive fortifications from scavenged metal and the wreckage of destroyed vehicles, turning the planet's once fertile farmlands into a nightmare landscape of craters, razor wire, and crude defensive works that bristle with weapons of every conceivable type and several inconceivable ones. The 47th Combined Founding has been sent to reinforce the beleaguered defenders and push the Orcs back. It is a task that would be daunting for veteran soldiers, for a regiment of barely trained conscripts, and it is something closer to a sentence. The drop from orbit is everything that the training exercises were not. The landing craft shakes and bucks as it descends through the atmosphere, anti-aircraft fire from Orc positions detonating around it in bursts of dirty orange flame. The noise is beyond anything Kalen has ever experienced, a constant, overlapping cacophony of engine roar, explosive detonations, and the scream of atmospheric friction that makes conversation impossible and thought extremely difficult. The craft is packed with soldiers, 40 of them crammed into a space designed for 30, standing shoulder to shoulder with their weapons held across their chests and their faces hidden behind the rebreather masks that the Munitorum issues for atmospheric entry. Kalen cannot see outside the craft. There are no windows, in just bare metal walls that shake and rattle with every near miss from the Orc guns below. He can feel the craft descending, the pull of gravity shifting as the pilot maneuvers through the fire, banking and weaving in a pattern that would be impressive if Kalen could appreciate it, and terrifying if he could see it. The soldier next to him, a man whose name he never learned because they were assigned to different squads, is praying under his breath, the words barely audible above the din. On his other side, Sarah stands, with her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed on some middle distance that only she can see, her hands white-knuckled around the stock of her lasgun. The craft hits the ground hard enough that everyone inside is thrown forward against their restraints, hard enough that the metal floor buckles slightly beneath Kalen's boots. The ramp drops open, and the world outside floods in. The first thing he notices is the smell. It hits him before anything else. A wave of odors, so intense and so foreign that his rebreather struggles to filter them. Smoke, thick and acrid, carrying the chemical signature of burning promethium, and something else, something organic and foul that he cannot identify and does not want to. Mud, wet and heavy, saturated with the decomposition products of things that died in it and were left where they fell. And beneath it all, a scent that is entirely alien, musky and sharp, like the smell of a predator's den, which is exactly what it is. This is what orcs smell like. This is the scent that has been ground into the soil of Kesrin's Fall by 3 years of occupation. The second thing he notices is the sound, or rather the change in sound. The enclosed roar of the landing craft's interior is replaced by the open, echoing chaos of a battlefield. Explosions, near and far. The crack of lasgun fire, familiar from training but somehow different here, more urgent, more ragged. The deeper bark of bolter weapons from somewhere to the left, and under it all, like a bass note that underpins the entire auditory landscape, a sound that Kalen has never heard before and will never forget. It is the sound of orcs, thousands of them, roaring their battle cry from somewhere beyond the smoke and the mist. A primal, throaty bellow of aggression that seems to rise from the earth itself. His squad leader is shouting, pointing toward a series of trenches that have been carved into the mud about 200 meters from the landing zone. Kalen runs. He does not think about running. He does not decide to run. His body simply does what weeks of training have conditioned it to do, moving in the direction indicated, staying low, keeping his weapon ready. Around him, the other members of his squad are doing the same thing, a ragged line of olive-drab figures sprinting through mud and smoke toward the relative safety of the trench line. He reaches the trench and drops into it, sliding down the muddy slope on his back and landing in a pool of standing water that immediately soaks through his fatigues to the skin. The trench is about 2 meters deep and perhaps a meter wide, reinforced with sheets of corrugated metal and wooden planking that has already begun to rot in the damp conditions. Other soldiers are already here, veterans of the fighting, who look at the new arrivals with the flat, appraising eyes of people who have seen too many fresh faces come and go to bother learning names. "Welcome to the war," one of them says. A woman with sergeant's stripes on her arm and a scar that runs from her left temple to the corner of her jaw, bisecting her ear along the way. "Stay down, stay quiet, and don't shoot at anything until I tell you to. The greenskins can hear a lasgun charge from 1/2 kilometer, and the last thing we need is to draw a mob down on this section before we're dug in." Kalen nods. His heart is hammering so hard that he can feel it in his teeth. His hands are shaking. He is cold, wet, terrified, and approximately 10,000 light years from the manufactorum floor where he was assembling last cells 6 weeks ago. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the adrenaline and the fear, the same small, quiet voice that spoke to him on his first night aboard the troop ship asks its question again. How did it come to this? But the question is rhetorical now. He knows how it came to this. He has lived every step of the process, from the knock on the door, to the processing hall, to the troop ship, to the training ground, to this trench on this alien world. And he understands with perfect clarity that the answer to the question does not matter. What matters is that he is here, and the enemy is out there, and the people standing beside him in the mud are depending on him to do his job. So he grips his lasgun, and settles his back against the trench wall, and waits for whatever comes next. What comes next, for most new soldiers, is not immediate combat, but the peculiar agony of anticipation. The orcs on Kesrin's Fall are a constant presence, their camps and fortifications visible from the Imperial lines as a jagged silhouette on the horizon, smoke rising from their forges where they endlessly construct and modify their ramshackle war machines. They are loud, even at a distance, their camps producing a continuous background noise of hammering, engine revving, and the occasional burst of weapons fire that seems to serve no tactical purpose, but is simply what orcs do when they are bored. But the orcs are not attacking this section of the line today. They attacked yesterday, according to the veterans, and they will probably attack again tomorrow or the day after. Orcs do not follow the kind of strategic planning that human military doctrine understands. They fight when they feel like fighting, which is most of the time, but they are not machines. They rest, they eat, they argue among themselves, they tinker with their vehicles and weapons in ways that should not work but somehow do. And when the mood strikes them, when the war boss feels that enough boys have gathered, and enough weapons have been built, and enough waiting has happened, they come. And when they come like nothing else in the galaxy. But for now, in this muddy trench on this ruined world, there is only the waiting. And the waiting, as every soldier who has ever served in any army on any world in any age of human history will tell you, is its own kind of torment. Kalen's squad settles into the rhythm of trench life with the clumsy unfamiliarity of people learning a new routine. Guard duty is assigned in 4-hour shifts, 2 soldiers at a time watching the no man's land between the Imperial lines and the Orc positions, while the rest of the squad eats, sleeps, or tends to the endless maintenance tasks that trench living requires. The trenches are in constant need of repair, their walls eroding under the rain that falls with dreary regularity, the drainage channels clogging with mud and debris that must be cleared by hand. The duckboards that line the trench floor sink into the mud and must be repositioned. The sandbags that reinforce the parapet develop leaks and must be replaced. And the latrines are crude pits dug into the rear of the trench system and covered with sheets of canvas, must be maintained with a diligence that reflects both practical hygiene concerns and the very real risk of disease in conditions this unsanitary. The food is corpse starch, the same grey flavourless blocks that they ate on the troopship, supplemented occasionally by tins of processed meat in a thick, salty gravy that might be the most delicious thing Kalen has ever tasted, not because it is actually good, but because anything that is not corpse starch tastes like a feast by comparison. Recaf is available in limited quantities, brewed in battered metal pots over small Prometheum stoves, and it serves as both a stimulant and a social ritual. The act of sharing a cup of recaf with your squad mates being one of the few moments of normalcy that trench life permits. Sleep comes in fragments, snatched between duties and interrupted by the sounds of distant combat, the occasional crack of a sniper's last round, or the more alarming closer reports of weapons fire that indicate something is happening on a neighboring section of the line. Kalen learns to sleep in his flak armor, his lasgun across his chest, his boots on, ready to move at a moment's notice. He learns to sleep in the rain, in the cold, in the mud. He learns that the human body can adapt to almost any level of discomfort if given no alternative, and that sleep is not a luxury, but a biological necessity that will assert itself regardless of the conditions. The bonds between the members of his squad deepen in the way that bonds always deepen under shared hardship. There is no privacy in a trench, no secrets, no personal space. Everyone sees everyone else at their worst, at their weakest, at their most afraid. And in that mutual vulnerability, a kind of trust develops that is unlike anything Kalen has ever experienced in his civilian life. He knows that Sarah grinds her teeth when she sleeps, and that Baroque hums the same melody every time he cleans his weapon, a tune from his childhood that he cannot stop humming even when the others ask him to. He knows that Tesh, the teenager who lied about his age, cries silently at night when he thinks no one is watching, and that no one mentions it in the morning because everyone understands. And he knows, with the quiet certainty that comes from living at close quarters with people who would die for you, that these are the best people he has ever known. Not because they are exceptional. They are not. They are ordinary men and women who were pulled from ordinary lives and thrown into extraordinary circumstances. And they have responded by doing the only thing that ordinary people can do in impossible situations. They have held on to each other. The commissar visits their section of the trench periodically, walking the line with the unhurried pace of a man who wants to be seen and whose presence is intended to convey a specific message. Holt is not the caricature of a commissar that the underhive stories describe, the trigger-happy executioner who shoots soldiers for blinking at the wrong moment. He is instead something more complicated and in some ways more frightening. He is a true believer, a man who genuinely sees the Imperial Guard as a holy instrument and the soldiers within it as the emperor's chosen servants. When he speaks to the troops, which he does rarely and briefly, his words carry the weight of absolute conviction. And when he executes a soldier, which he does twice during Kaelin's first week on the line, he does so with the somber, regretful demeanor of a priest performing a necessary but distasteful sacrament. The first execution is a man from another squad who was caught trying to slip away from his post during a guard shift. He was not even trying to desert, just trying to find a quieter section of the trench where he could sleep without the noise of the forward observation posts keeping him awake. But absence from one's post during a guard duty is one of the offences that the commissariat takes most seriously, and Holt finds the man within minutes, delivers a brief statement about the sacred trust of the sentry and the consequences of betraying that trust, and shoots him through the head with his bolt pistol. The report is enormous. A bolt pistol fires a self-propelled, mass-reactive round that detonates on impact, and the effect on a human skull at close range is something that no training exercise could ever prepare someone for. Kaelin, who is close enough to see it happen, feels the blood drain from his face and a wave of nausea rise in his throat. Around him, the other soldiers react in various ways, some looking away, some freezing in place, a few nodding grimly, as if this is simply the cost of doing business in the guard. Boss Holt holsters his weapon, orders the body removed, and continues his walk along the trench as if nothing has happened. And in the quiet that follows, Kaelin understands something fundamental about the Imperial Guard that no amount of propaganda or training could have taught him. You are not a person here. You are a component, and when a component malfunctions, it is replaced. There is no malice in it. There is no cruelty, at least not in the way that a sadist would understand cruelty. There is only the remorseless logic of a system that values function above all else and will not tolerate anything that compromises the machine's ability to perform its purpose. This is the world that Kaelin Voss now lives in, a world where the line between life and death is as thin as a commissar's patience, where the enemies outside the trench are only marginally more dangerous than the system that put you in the trench in the first place, where the greatest victory a common soldier can achieve is to survive long enough to become a veteran, and the greatest honor available to anyone in a flak jacket and a laser gun is to die well, doing their duty in a manner that the commissar can describe approvingly in his daily report to the regiment's commanding officer. And the enemies. We should talk about the enemies, because if the system is the cage, the enemies are the flames that surround it, and the variety of ways in which the galaxy can kill a guardsman is a subject that deserves its own attention. Start with the orcs, because they are what Kaelin is facing right now, and because they are, in many ways, the most relatable enemy that the Guard encounters. Not because they are sympathetic, they are not, but because they are comprehensible. Orcs want to fight, they want to win, they want to destroy things and take things and prove that they are the biggest and the strongest. These are motivations that any human can understand, even if the scale at which the orcs operate renders those motivations into something monstrous. An orc is big. The average orc stands at least a full head taller than a human, with a physique that combines the muscle mass of a professional strongman with the skeletal durability of something built from reinforced ceramite. Their skin is green, ranging from a pale lime to a dark forest shade, and it is tough enough to turn a knife blade and absorb blunt impacts that would shatter human bone. But their jaws are filled with tusks and grinding teeth designed for tearing through whatever they can get their hands on, and their hands, massive, thick-fingered, and ending in blunt claws, are capable of ripping through flak armor the way a normal person might tear paper. They are not sophisticated. Their technology is crude, their tactics are simple, and their strategic planning, to the extent that it exists at all, consists primarily of get everyone together and run at the enemy. But what they lack in sophistication, they make up for in sheer, overwhelming aggression. An orc charge is not a military maneuver. It is a natural disaster, a green flood of roaring, bellowing violence that washes over defensive positions and drowns everything in its path. the first time Kalen sees an orc charge, while it is the third day after his arrival on Kestrin's Fall. The warning comes through the Vox network first, a terse, crackling alert from the forward observation post that contact is imminent, followed by the sound of the orc war drums, deep, rhythmic booming that seems to come from underground, shaking the earth beneath the trenches and making the standing water ripple. Then the shouting starts, that primal, guttural roar that Kalen heard from a distance on his first day. But this time, it is closer, much closer, and growing louder with every second. He scrambles to the firing step and peers over the parapet, and what he sees will haunt his dreams for as long as he lives. They are coming across no man's land in a solid mass, shoulder to shoulder, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, yet their green skin barely visible beneath layers of crude armor, metal plates and scrap metal and leather straps, all of it welded and bolted and riveted into shapes that approximate human body armor, the way a child's drawing approximates a photograph. They are carrying weapons of every conceivable type, from axes the size of a man to guns that look like they were assembled from spare parts found in a junkyard, which is probably exactly what they are. And they are fast, far faster than anything that size should be able to move, eating up the distance between their lines and the Imperial trenches with a loping, ground-covering sprint that covers meters with every stride. "Fire!" the sergeant shouts, and Kalen fires. His laser gun cracks, the recoil pushing back against his shoulder, the beam of concentrated light lancing out across the distance and striking an orc in the chest. The orc staggers, stumbles, keeps coming. He fires again, and on the third shot, the orc finally goes down, crashing forward into the mud and sliding to a stop. But there are more behind it, so many more, and they are still coming, and the noise is so loud that Kalen can no longer hear the sergeant or his squad mates, or even his own weapon. The next few minutes are the longest of his life. He fires until his power pack is empty, slaps in a new one, fires again. The orcs hit the trench line like a wave hitting a breakwater, some of them tumbling into the trenches, others leaping over them, still others being cut down by the concentrated laser gun fire of the defenders. The fighting degenerates into a close-quarters nightmare, as the kind of combat that no amount of training can truly prepare a person for, where the enemy is close enough to smell, and the only thing between you and a violent death is the width of a bayonet blade. Kalen stabs an orc that drops into the trench beside him, driving his bayonet into the gap between two plates of its crude armor. The orc snarls and swings at him with a fist the size of his head, and he ducks, feeling the displaced air as the blow passes over him, close enough to ruffle his hair through his helmet. Baroch, beside him, fires point blank into the orc's face, and the combination of the last shot and the bayonet wound finally brings the creature down. The fight lasts less than 20 minutes. When it is over, the orcs have pulled back, not because they were defeated, but because their charge ran out of momentum, which is how orc tactics work. They come, they fight, and when they lose interest or something else catches their attention, they withdraw. They will come again. They always come again. But for now, the line holds. Kalen leans against the trench wall and breathes. His hands are shaking. His fatigues are soaked with mud, water, and something else. Orc blood, which is red just like human blood, but thicker, darker, and carrying that alien musk that permeates everything the orcs touch. He looks around at his squad. Everyone is alive. Not everyone is unhurt. Tesh is cradling his left arm, which appears to be broken, and Sarah has a cut across her forehead that is bleeding freely down her face, but everyone is alive. The relief is so intense that it registers as a physical sensation. There's a warmth that spreads through his chest and loosens the knot that has been sitting in his stomach since the charge began. They survived. They stood, they fought, and they survived. It is not glory. It is not the triumphant victory of the propaganda picts. It is ugly, messy, terrifying, and demeaning. A desperately close-run engagement in a small section of a much larger conflict that will probably not rate more than a single line in the regiment's daily action report. But it is survival, and in the Imperial Guard, survival is the only victory that matters. Now multiply this experience across a galaxy. Imagine it happening not once, but hundreds of times, on thousands of worlds, to millions of soldiers, every single day. Imagine the accumulated weight of all that fear, all that violence, and all that survival against odds that should have been impossible. This is what it means to serve in the Astra Militarum. This is what awaits every person who hears the knock on the door and finds the administratum clerk standing on the other side. The orcs are just the beginning. They are the enemy that Kalen knows, the enemy that he has been trained to fight and has now survived fighting. But the galaxy of the 41st millennium contains horrors that make the orcs look like a playground scuffle by comparison, and the guardsman who lives long enough becomes intimately familiar with all of them. Consider the forces of chaos. If the orcs are a natural disaster, chaos is a disease, one that attacks not the body, but the soul. The armies of chaos are led by warriors who were once human. Space Marines who turned their backs on the Emperor during the Horus heresy 10,000 years ago and have spent the intervening millennia in the hellish dimension of the warp, their bodies and minds warped by the corrosive energies of that place into something that is no longer entirely recognizable as having once been human. Chaos. Space Marines are everything that a regular guardsman is not. 8 feet tall, encased in power armor that can shrug off lasfire the way a person might shrug off raindrops, armed with weapons that fire rocket-propelled explosive rounds, and sustained by a hatred of the Imperium that has been festering for 100 centuries. Fighting chaos. Marines with laser guns and flak armor is not a battle. It is an exercise in managed futility. Off the Guard does not defeat Chaos Marines through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. It defeats them, when it defeats them at all, through sheer weight of numbers, surrounding the enemy with enough bodies and enough guns that even the most heavily armored target eventually succumbs to the accumulated damage. The casualty ratios in such engagements are nightmarish, often running to 10, 20, even 50 guardsmen killed for every Chaos Marine brought down. But the traitor Marines are not the worst thing that chaos brings to the battlefield. The worst thing is what chaos does to the mind. The warp is a dimension of psychic energy, a reflection of the emotional and spiritual state of every sentient being in the galaxy, and the entities that dwell within it are literally made of human fear, anger, despair, and desire. When chaos comes to a world, it does not simply invade, it corrupts, it whispers, it plants doubts and inflames desires and turns loyal citizens into mad-eyed cultists who welcome the very horrors that are consuming them. Guardsmen who fight chaos must not only contend with the enemy in front of them, but with the enemy inside their own heads. The constant, insidious suggestion that resistance is pointless, that the Emperor does not care, that the only rational response to the darkness is to embrace it. This is why commissars are particularly zealous when it comes to guarding against the taint of chaos. This is why soldiers who show signs of corruption, even minor signs, even signs that might be nothing more than the natural psychological strain of combat, are dealt with swiftly and permanently. The stakes are too high for mercy. A single corrupted soldier can, and historically has, brought down entire regiments, spreading the taint through the ranks like a plague until the unit is no longer fighting for the Emperor, but against him. Then there are the Tyranids, and the Tyranids are something else entirely. Where orcs are savage and chaos is insidious, the Tyranids are alien in the truest sense of the word. They are a species, if species is even the right term, that exists for one purpose and one purpose only, to consume all biological matter in the galaxy and convert it into more of themselves. They travel between the stars in vast hive fleets, living ships made of bone and chitin and bioengineered organs, each one containing trillions of organisms, ranging from tiny, as skittering creatures barely larger than a man's hand, to massive bio-titans that stand as tall as imperial buildings and can level city blocks with a single sweep of their bladed limbs. Fighting Tyranids is a unique kind of terror. They do not negotiate because they have nothing to say. They do not retreat, because retreat is not a concept that their hive mind recognizes. They do not stop, because there is nothing inside them that is capable of stopping. They just come, wave after wave after wave, an endless tide of claws and teeth, and acid and chitin that washes over defensive positions and consumes everything in its path. The standard Imperial response to a Tyranid invasion is to fortify, hold, and pray that the reinforcements arrive before the ammunition runs out, because when the ammunition runs out, the battle is over. But there is no hand-to-hand combat with a Tyranid swarm. There is only being eaten alive. And beyond the major threats, there are countless smaller horrors that a guardsman might face during a career that most people would not wish on their worst enemy. Dark Eldar raiders who strike from hidden portals in the fabric of space, stealing people away to their nightmare city in a dimension of pain and torture. Necrons, ancient machine beings who have slept beneath the surface of worlds for millions of years and are now waking up, armed with weapons that can strip the atoms from a soldier's body in a flash of green light. The Tau, a young and vigorous alien empire that wages war with advanced technology and a philosophy of cooperation that the Imperium considers heretical, which is ironic given that the Tau's weapons can punch through a Lehman Russ battle tank's armor at ranges that make Imperial weapons look like toys. Each enemy presents its own particular flavor of lethality, its own unique way of killing a guardsman. And the guardsman, armed with a lasgun and wearing flak armor, is expected to stand against all of them. Not because anyone believes this is fair, or even particularly effective on an individual level, but because the Guard has numbers that no other force in the galaxy can match, and in a war of attrition, numbers are the only weapon that matters. This is the reality that waits behind every draft notice, behind every knock on every door on every hive world and forge world and agri world in the Imperium. The citizen who is taken from their life and given a uniform and a weapon is not being sent to glory. They are being sent to a place where the floor is made of mud and the ceiling is made of fire and the walls are made of enemies that should not exist, and they are expected to hold their position until they die or the war ends, whichever comes first. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that it works. The system, for all its cruelty and inefficiency and waste of human life, works. The Imperium has survived for 10,000 years using this method, spending lives like currency to buy time for a species that cannot afford to stop fighting for even a single day. Every guardsman who stands in a trench and fires a lasgun at an oncoming horde is contributing to that survival. They're adding their small weight to the side of the scales that keeps humanity from tipping into extinction. They do not know this, most of them. They do not see the big picture, the vast strategic calculus that turns their individual suffering into a collective victory. They see only the mud and the blood and the faces of the enemies charging toward them, and they do the only thing they can do. They fight. The weeks on Kesrin's fall turn into months. Kaelin's squad rotates between sections of the trench line, sometimes holding a quiet sector where the most dangerous thing is boredom, sometimes holding a hot sector where orc attacks come daily, and the casualty lists grow longer with each engagement. They lose people. Tesh, the teenager who lied about his age, is killed during a mortar bombardment when an orc rocket lands directly on his foxhole. He dies instantly, which is the only mercy the war offers him. His body is removed, his equipment is redistributed, and his name is added to the casualty roll. The squad mourns in their own way, privately and briefly, because there is no time for anything more, and the war does not pause for grief. They lose others, names and faces that Kaelin tries to hold on to, but that the relentless pressure of daily survival gradually pushes to the margins of his memory. He remembers them in flashes, a laugh, a habit, a particular way of holding a recaf mug, but the details fade, replaced by the immediate concerns of staying alive, staying fed, staying sane. The veterans tell them that this is normal, that the forgetting is a survival mechanism, or the brain's way of protecting itself from an accumulating weight of loss that would otherwise crush it. The veterans say a lot of things, most of them in the blunt, profanity-laced language that the Guard uses as a kind of universal dialect. They talk about battles they have fought, worlds they have seen, enemies they have killed. They share practical advice about everything from keeping feet dry in trench conditions to predicting orc attack patterns based on the frequency and volume of their pre-battle drumming. And they share the unspoken knowledge that no manual or primer contains, the knowledge that comes from surviving long enough to understand what survival requires. So the biggest thing Kalen learns from the veterans is something so simple that it seems obvious in hindsight, but was not obvious at all when he first arrived on this world. It is this: the secret to surviving in the Imperial Guard is not skill or bravery or faith, it is adaptability. The soldier who survives is the one who can adjust to changing circumstances faster than the circumstances can kill them. The soldier who locks up, who freezes, who cannot process the information that the battlefield is throwing at them and respond appropriately, that soldier dies. Not because they are weak, not because they are cowardly, but because the battlefield is a machine that runs on decision-making speed. And the soldiers who can make decisions faster, even if those decisions are not perfect, are the ones who outlast the soldiers who cannot. As Kalen adapts, he is not the best soldier in his squad, and he is not the worst. He is average, which in the Guard means alive, and that is enough. He learns when to shoot and when to hold fire. He learns when to advance and when to dig in. He learns the sound of different orc weapons and what each sound means in terms of threat level. He learns to read the battlefield, to spot the subtle signs that indicate where the next attack will come from, to position himself and his squadmates in ways that maximize their chances of surviving the next engagement. And slowly, gradually, without any single moment of transformation, he becomes something that he never expected to become. He becomes a soldier, not the gleaming hero of the propaganda picts, not the fanatical warrior of the Imperial cult's teachings, just a soldier, a tired, mud-caked, a perpetually hungry, frequently terrified person who has learned to do a difficult job under impossible conditions and who does it because the alternative is dying, and because the people next to him are depending on him, and because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the fear and the exhaustion and the grinding dehumanization of the system, there is still a stubborn, irrational refusal to give up. This is what the draft produces. Not weapons, not heroes, not the faceless automatons of Imperial propaganda, just people, ordinary people, who have been broken down and rebuilt into something that can function in the most hostile environment that the galaxy has to offer. People who, against all reason and all expectation, find ways to endure. The war on Kesrin's fall does not end during Kalen's time there. It does not end quickly at all. The orc presence on the planet is too deeply entrenched, too numerous, too stubbornly resistant to the kind of attritional warfare that the Guard specializes in. The 47th Combined Founding takes and holds ground, pushes forward in some sectors, falls back in others, and bleeds steadily throughout, replacing its losses with new drafts from worlds that Kalen has never heard of. Fresh-faced conscripts who arrive looking exactly the way he looked when he first dropped into the trench, scared and confused and profoundly out of their depth. He helps them when he can, shows them how to maintain their weapons in wet conditions, how to dig a foxhole that will not collapse in the rain, how to identify the sound of incoming orc artillery in time to get their heads down. He does this not out of any particular sense of duty or compassion, but because it is what was done for him, and because soldiers who know what they are doing are less likely to get the soldiers around them killed through ignorance. And he watches them die, some of them, in the same kinds of engagements that he survived through no particular merit of his own. The randomness of it is perhaps the hardest thing to accept. The bullet that kills the soldier next to you could just as easily have killed you. The mortar round that lands 10 meters to the left could have landed 10 meters to the right. The difference between life and death in the trenches is often measured in centimeters and milliseconds. Distances and durations so small that no human decision can reliably navigate them. You survive, or you do not. And the universe does not explain its reasons. Time passes, the war continues, and Kalen's mind, without conscious permission, begins to do something that the veterans warned him about. It begins to forget. not the important things, the tactical knowledge, the survival instincts, the bond with his squad mates. Those grow stronger with each passing day. But the other things, the civilian things, the memories of his old life that were once so vivid and so painful, those begin to fade. His mother's face becomes slightly less distinct in his memory. The layout of his hab block becomes harder to recall. The rhythm of the factory shift, the smell of machine oil, the particular shade of yellow that the lumen strips cast on the assembly line. All of these fade into a soft, indistinct haze that he can still access if he concentrates, but that no longer occupies the foreground of his thoughts. He does not know if this is good or bad. And the veterans would say it is good, that letting go of what you were is the price you pay for becoming what you need to be. The commissar would say it is irrelevant, that a soldier's past is meaningless compared to their present duty. And Kalen himself, if pressed, would say that he does not have the luxury of deciding whether it is good or bad. It simply is. The war has made him into something, and the something that he has become does not have room for the person he used to be. This is how the draft changes people, not through a dramatic transformation, not through a single defining moment, but through a slow, relentless process of erosion that wears away the civilian and reveals the soldier underneath. It is not a violent process, though violence is often its catalyst. It is something quieter, as something that happens in the spaces between the explosions and the screaming, in the long hours of waiting and watching and trying not to think about the things you have seen. It is the gradual replacement of one set of instincts with another, the slow rewiring of a mind that was built for factory work and ration queues and the small, predictable rhythms of civilian life, until it becomes a mind that is built for something else entirely, something harder, something sharper, something that can function in the space between life and death and make the split-second decisions that determine which side of that line you end up on. The old Kalen, the factory worker from Caldera Primus who assembled last cells and visited his mother on his days off, is still in there somewhere. He surfaces occasionally, usually in the quiet moments between engagements, when the adrenaline has faded and the exhaustion has not yet claimed him. He surfaces when someone in the squad tells a joke that reminds him of something from his old life, or when the taste of recaf triggers a memory of the communal canteen on level 47 where he used to eat his midday meal. But these moments are becoming rarer, and the Kalen who experiences them is increasingly a stranger to the Kalen who spends most of his waking hours scanning the horizon for signs of movement and calculating fields of fire. The regiment's culture begins to form during these months on Kesrin's fall, shaped by the specific conditions of this particular war on this particular world. Every guard regiment develops its own culture over time, whilst its own traditions and superstitions and ways of doing things that distinguish it from every other regiment in the Imperium. Some of these cultures are inherited from the regiment's homeworld, carried across the stars like seeds in the pockets of transplanted farmers. Others develop organically, growing out of the shared experiences that bind soldiers together in ways that civilian life cannot replicate. The 47th Combined Founding, being a conscript regiment drawn from multiple worlds and social strata, does not have the deep cultural roots of a regiment like the Cadians or the Catechins. Its culture is something that must be built from scratch, assembled from the fragments of 100 different traditions and the new rituals that emerge from the specific demands of trench warfare against orcs. And build it they do, as one small habit at a time, one shared joke at a time, one quietly observed superstition at a time. The rituals start small. Someone begins scratching a tally mark into the stock of their lasgun after each engagement, counting the number of greenskins they have personally brought down. Others adopt the practice, and within weeks it has become a regimental tradition, soldiers comparing their tallies with the same competitive pride that once belonged to factory workers comparing their production numbers. The tallies mean nothing in tactical terms. They do not change the outcome of any battle or save any lives, but they provide a sense of individual agency in an environment that is otherwise defined by collective anonymity, a way of saying, I was here, I did something, my actions mattered, even if the system that put me here does not agree. Our other traditions are darker. The soldiers begin leaving small offerings at the entrance to their trench sections before major engagements, tokens placed on the sandbags with careful deliberation. A spent power pack here, a torn page from the uplifting primer there, someone's personal possession, a trinket or a keepsake, placed where the morning mist might carry it toward whatever powers might be listening. The chaplain attached to the regiment, a serious young man whose faith is as absolute as Commissar Holt's, officially discourages these practices as bordering on superstition rather than proper worship of the God Emperor. But even he does not actively forbid them, because he understands what the command structure sometimes forgets, that soldiers need ways to express their fear that do not involve breaking down entirely. And a little harmless superstition is better than the alternatives. Sarah develops a habit of humming during firefights, a low, tuneless sound that is barely audible above the noise of combat, but that her squad mates learn to listen for because it means she is still alive and still functioning. Baroch begins every morning by kissing his lasgun's barrel before his first sip of recaf, a gesture so habitual that he performs it even when half asleep, his lips pressing against the cold metal with the absent-minded devotion of a man crossing himself before a meal. These are not religious acts, not exactly, though the line between religion and superstition in the Imperial Guard is blurred beyond recognition. They are coping mechanisms, small islands of personal ritual in an ocean of institutionalized chaos, and ways of imposing order on a world that has none. The regiment also develops its own language, a dialect that would be incomprehensible to an outsider, but that communicates volumes to anyone who has served in the 47th on Kesrin's Fall. Orc attacks become green weather. A section of the trench that is particularly exposed to enemy fire becomes the gallery. The act of surviving an engagement without casualties becomes keeping the count, a reference to the tally marks that have become the regiment's unofficial emblem. Death is referred to simply as going quiet, a euphemism that manages to be both clinical and oddly gentle, reducing the most terrible event in a soldier's existence to a simple description of its most obvious symptom. And beneath all of this, running through the regiment like a vein of ore through rock, is the bond that holds everything together. The bond between soldiers who have bled together and grieved together and survived together in conditions that should have broken them 10 times over. It is not friendship, not love, not loyalty in any of the forms that these words usually describe. It is something more fundamental, more primal, something that exists below the level of conscious thought and connects the members of a squad the way the roots of trees connect a forest. You do not choose it. You do not cultivate it. It grows on its own, fed by shared suffering, and watered by the knowledge that the person next to you is the only barrier between you and the howling void of facing this alone. Now, this experience on Kesrin's Fall is one version of the drafted guardsman's story, but the Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, and the war it fights spans 1,000,000 worlds under alien stars. For every Kalen Voss slogging through the mud of an orc-held planet, there are 1,000 other conscripts facing 1,000 different nightmares, each one shaped by the particular enemy and the particular world and the particular regiment they have been assigned to. Consider for a moment the regiments that have become legendary across the Imperium, the ones whose names are spoken with reverence even in the halls of the Adeptus Astartes, who are not easily impressed by mere mortals. The death cause of Krieg, for instance, whose world was so devastated by civil war and nuclear destruction that its people exist in a state of perpetual penance, sending their sons and daughters to die in the Emperor's wars as an act of collective atonement. The Death Corps do not fear death. They welcome it, not with the mad-eyed fanaticism of chaos worshippers, but with the solemn acceptance of people who genuinely believe that dying in service to the Emperor is the only way to redeem their world's ancient sin. Their commissars do not execute soldiers for cowardice, because the Death Corps has no concept of cowardice. Their commissars instead have to restrain soldiers from throwing themselves into hopeless assaults, because Krieg's warriors seek death with the same fervor that other soldiers seek survival. Being drafted on Krieg is not like being drafted on Caldera Primus. There is no knock on the door, no reluctant compliance, no grieving families watching their children march away. On Krieg, service is the natural state of being. Children are raised in underground training facilities, are breathing filtered air through gas masks that become as much a part of their identity as their own faces. They do not mourn when they are selected for off-world service. They feel gratitude because they have been given the opportunity to die meaningfully, to add their death to the great ledger of sacrifice that may one day balance the account of their world's treachery. Or consider the Talon Desert Raiders, drawn from a world that was reduced to a barren wasteland by chemical warfare during the Horus Heresy. The Talon adapted, as humans always do, and their descendants became some of the finest light cavalry and guerrilla fighters in the Imperium. A Talon conscript does not learn trench warfare or bayonet charges. They learn to read the wind, to navigate by stars that are invisible to untrained eyes, to strike fast and hard and disappear before the enemy can respond. Their laser guns are customized for long-range accuracy rather than close-quarters volume of fire, and their armored units favor speed over protection, using light vehicles to harass and outmaneuver enemies that outnumber them many times over. The Mordian Iron Guard, on the other hand, represents everything that is rigid and unyielding about the imperial military tradition. Mordian is a tidally locked world where one hemisphere bakes in eternal sunlight and the other freezes in perpetual darkness. The population lives on the border between these two extremes, and their military doctrine reflects this precarious existence. Mordian soldiers are famous for their perfect discipline, their immaculate uniforms, and their absolute refusal to retreat under any circumstances. A Mordian regiment on the defensive is like a wall of iron, each soldier standing shoulder to shoulder with their comrades, firing in disciplined volleys, maintaining formation even as their lines are torn apart by enemy fire. They do not run because running is not in their operational vocabulary. They stand, they fight, and they die in perfect order, their uniforms as crisp at the moment of death as they were at the morning inspection. Each of these regiments represents a different answer to the same fundamental question. How do you take ordinary human beings and make them capable of fighting in a galaxy that is trying to kill them? The answer varies depending on the culture, the world, the enemy, and 1,000 other variables that make each regiment unique. But the underlying truth remains the same. The Imperial Guard takes people, are ordinary people, and it breaks them down and rebuilds them into something that can survive, at least for a while, in the most hostile environment imaginable. Whether you are a hive worker from Caldera Primus, or a gas mask-wearing penitent from Krieg, or a desert nomad from Talon, the fundamental experience is the same. You are taken from one life and given another, and the transition is paid for in blood and fear, and the gradual surrender of everything you thought you were. Let us return to Kaelin's story, because his story, like all stories in the 41st millennium, must eventually come to an end. Not a dramatic end, not the kind of climactic resolution that makes for satisfying fiction. Just an end, the way a match eventually burns out, or a candle eventually runs down to the stub. The truth about the Imperial Guard, in the truth that the propaganda pics never show and the recruitment speeches never mention, is that most guardsmen do not die in glorious last stands or heroic charges. Most guardsmen die in ways that are mundane and unremarkable, killed by stray rounds or disease, or the simple accumulation of wounds and deprivations that eventually overwhelm even the most resilient human body. They die in their trenches, at their posts, in the medical tents where overworked medics do their best with inadequate supplies. They die of infections that would have been trivial to treat in a civilian hospital. They die of malnutrition, of exposure, of exhaustion. They die because the system that sustains them is vast and slow and imperfect, and sometimes the supply lines do not reach the front in time, and sometimes the reinforcements arrive a day too late. And sometimes the intelligence reports are wrong, and sometimes a perfectly executed plan falls apart because war does not care about plans. The Departamento Monitorum does not publish comprehensive casualty statistics, partly because the numbers are too large to be meaningful, and partly because publishing them would undermine recruitment efforts. But the best estimates suggest that the average life expectancy of a conscript guardsman from the moment they arrive at their first war zone is approximately 15 hours of active combat. Not 15 days, not 15 weeks, 15 hours. The number is misleading in some ways, because it includes the high percentage of conscripts who die in their first engagement, which skews the average dramatically downward. Those who survive their first few battles have significantly better prospects, because they have begun to learn the things that keep you alive. But even for veterans, the numbers are grim. The Imperium does not track how many guardsmen survive long enough to retire, because retirement is not a concept that the Guard officially recognizes. You serve until you cannot serve anymore, and the most common reason for being unable to serve is death. There are exceptions, of course. Some guardsmen serve for decades, surviving engagement after engagement through a combination of skill, luck, and the kind of stubborn tenacity that refuses to acknowledge the statistical improbability of continued existence. These soldiers become the veterans, the old hands, the grizzled sergeants and weathered officers who form the backbone of every regiment. They are living proof that survival is possible, as walking examples of the principle that the human body and the human spirit can endure more than anyone would have thought possible. But they are also, in their own way, the loneliest people in the Guard, because they have watched everyone they ever cared about die, one by one, replacement by replacement, until they are the only ones left who remember what the regiment used to be. Kalen Voss's story does not end on Kesrin's fall. The campaign there grinds on for years after his arrival, and at some point that is impossible to identify precisely, Kalen transitions from being a new conscript to being a veteran. The change is not marked by any ceremony or acknowledgement. There is no moment where someone pins a medal on his chest or promotes him to a rank he did not earn. He simply becomes, but by the process of outliving everyone who arrived alongside him, one of the old hands. The soldiers who arrive after him look at him the way he used to look at the veterans who were already in the trench when he first dropped into it. They see someone who has survived long enough to know things they do not yet know, and they assume that his survival must be the result of some special quality, some particular skill or wisdom that they lack. It is not. Kalen knows this, even if the new arrivals do not. His survival is the result of the same random combination of factors that determines every outcome on the battlefield. He was standing in the right place at the right time, or rather, not standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He ducked when the shrapnel flew. He zagged when the orc fired. He dug his foxhole slightly deeper than the soldier next to him, who died in the same mortar bombardment that left Kalen with nothing worse than a ringing in his ears that took a week to fade. There is no skill in this. There is no wisdom. There is only the cold, impersonal mathematics of probability, and on a long enough timeline, even the most favorable probabilities converge towards zero. Sarah is still alive, though she carries a limp from a wound that healed badly because the field hospital was out of proper surgical supplies when she was brought in. Baroque died 8 months after their arrival, killed by an orc sniper whose weapon should not have been accurate at that range, but was, because orc technology operates on principles that human science cannot explain and human logic cannot accept. His death was the first one that Kalen felt as something more than a reduction in combat strength. He felt it in his chest, a physical ache that had nothing to do with injury and everything to do with the loss of someone who had become, without either of them noticing, the closest thing to a friend that the Guard permits. He mourned Baroque the way guardsmen mourn, quickly and privately, in the quiet hour before dawn, when the trenches were still, and the only sound was the distant hammering from the orc camps. He did not cry. He had not cried since his first week on the planet, and even then the tears had been more about exhaustion than grief. Instead, he cleaned Baroque's laser gun, carefully and thoroughly, the way Baroque had always cleaned his own weapon every morning before recaf, humming that same tuneless melody that no one had ever been able to identify. Then he handed the weapon to the supply sergeant for redistribution, and he went back to work. Because that is what guardsmen do. They go back to work. Eventually, the war on Kesrin's fall reaches a point where the Imperial command structure decides that the planet can be held by a reduced garrison, and the 47th Combined Founding, or what remains of it, is redeployed to another war zone on another world against another enemy. The cycle begins again. New planet, new terrain, new threats, the same mud, the same fear, the same lasgun in the same tired hands. Kalen adapts, as he always adapts, because adaptability is the only skill that the Guard truly values, and the only skill that consistently keeps soldiers alive. But he fights on worlds whose names he cannot remember afterward, against enemies whose individual characteristics blur together into a single, undifferentiated mass of hostility. The specifics cease to matter after a while. Whether the thing trying to kill you is green-skinned and bellowing, or scaled and silent, or wreathed in unnatural flame, the response is the same. Find cover, return fire, hold the line, survive, repeat. The war is not a series of discrete events, but a continuous state of being, a condition that defines every waking moment, and most of the sleeping ones as well. And through it all, the question that Kalen asked himself on his first night in the troopship continues to echo in the back of his mind, though by now it has changed shape. It is no longer, how did it come to this? That question was answered long ago, answered by the knock on the door and the data slate and the processing hall, and every subsequent step that brought him from the factory floor to the battlefield. The question now is different. The question now is, what was the point? It is a dangerous question. The kind of question that commissars listen for and that chaplains are trained to address with carefully calibrated scripture. But it is also the most human question that a person can ask. The question that separates a conscious being from a weapon system. And Kalen asks it because he is still, despite everything, a conscious being. He is still, beneath the flak armor and the calluses and the 1,000-yard stare that the veterans share like a family resemblance, a human being who wants his suffering to mean something. The answer, when it comes, it does not arrive in a flash of revelation or a moment of dramatic clarity. It arrives slowly, piece by piece, assembled from the accumulated evidence of years of service. It arrives in the face of a young conscript whose life Kalen saved by pulling her into a foxhole a half-second before an artillery round turned the ground where she had been standing into a smoking crater. It arrives in the sound of Sarah's voice, still humming during firefights after all these years, a sound that means, I am still here, I am still fighting, I am still human. It arrives in the knowledge that somewhere, on some world that Kalen will never visit, the people he is fighting to protect are living their ordinary lives, eating their ordinary meals, sleeping in their ordinary beds, yet completely unaware that their continued existence depends on the willingness of strangers to stand in the mud and bleed on their behalf. The point is not glory. The point is not honor. The point is not the shining, abstract ideals that the propaganda pics celebrate and the recruitment speeches invoke. The point is simpler than that and more profound. The point is that someone has to do it. Someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. Someone has to hold the line while everyone else goes about their lives. And the fact that the someone in question did not volunteer, that they were taken from their home and their family and their life and forced into a uniform at gunpoint, does not make their service less meaningful. If anything, it makes it more meaningful because a person who fights without having chosen to fight, who endures without any expectation of reward, who holds the line not because they want to, but because there is no one else, that person has achieved something that willing heroes never can. They have proven that ordinary human beings, when pushed to the very edge of what is survivable, are capable of extraordinary things. This is the legacy of every drafted guardsman who has ever lived and died in the service of the Imperium. Not the battles they won, or the enemies they killed, or the worlds they saved, but the simple, stubborn, impossibly brave fact that they were there at all, that they stood up when everything in their being was screaming at them to lie down, that they fought when fighting was the last thing they wanted to do, that they held on to their humanity, their connections, their capacity for caring, even in an environment that was specifically designed to strip those things away. Kalen Voss does not know how his story ends. None of us do, if we are being honest. He knows that the war will continue, because the war always continues. He knows that the enemies will keep coming, because the enemies always keep coming. He knows that the system that claimed him will never release him, because the system does not release what it has taken. But he also knows, with a certainty that no commissar's bolt pistol and no chaplain's scripture could ever provide, that his life has meaning. Not the meaning that the Imperium assigns to it, the meaning of a cog in a machine or a round in a magazine, but the meaning that he has found for himself. What in the bonds he has formed, and the lives he has saved, and the humanity he has preserved against all the forces that have tried to take it from him. And maybe that is enough. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, maybe the fact that a single human heart can still find something worth beating for is the most revolutionary act imaginable. Maybe the real victory is not in the territory gained or the enemies destroyed, but in the quiet, persistent, impossibly stubborn survival of the human spirit in conditions that should have crushed it long ago. The Astra Militarum will continue to draft ordinary citizens from ordinary worlds, turning them into soldiers and sending them to fight and die in wars that span the galaxy. The knock will come again and again and again, us on doors in every hive and every hab block and every farmstead across 1,000,000 worlds. And the people who answer that knock will go through the same process that Kalen went through, the same fear, the same loss, the same slow transformation from civilian to soldier, the same grinding, relentless exposure to horrors that no training can prepare you for. But they will also find the same things that Kalen found, the bonds that form in the crucible of shared suffering, the small moments of kindness and humor that survive even in the darkest places, the stubborn, unreasonable, magnificently human refusal to be reduced to nothing more than a number on a data slate or a body in a uniform. And in finding those things, they will prove what the Imperium has never understood and the enemies of humanity have never been able to overcome. That the human spirit, even when it is drafted against its will, even when it is stripped of everything it once held dear, even when it is placed in a situation that should be impossible to survive, has a way of enduring, of adapting, of finding light in the darkness, however faint that light might be. This is the story of what it means to be drafted in Warhammer 40,000. It is not a story about heroes, though heroes emerge from it. It is not a story about victory, though victories are won within it. It is a story about ordinary people, caught up in extraordinary circumstances, who discover that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy is not a lasgun or a bolter or a battle titan. It is the willingness to keep going, one more step, one more day, one more battle, when every rational calculation says that you should have given up long ago. And somewhere in the galaxy right now, in a trench on a world that no one back home has ever heard of, a guardsman is gripping a lasgun with muddy hands and staring into the darkness, waiting for whatever comes next. They did not ask to be there. They did not choose this life. But they are there, and they are holding the line, and as long as they hold it, humanity survives for one more day. And in the grim darkness of the far future, one more day is all you can ask for. If this journey through the life of a drafted guardsman pulled you in, if you felt the mud between your fingers and the weight of the lasgun in your hands, then do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know that this is the kind of content you want to see more of, and it helps other fans of the 41st Millennium find this channel. If you are not already subscribed to Q on 40,000, go ahead and click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you do not miss the next deep dive into the lore of Warhammer 40,000. I have got more stories like this one coming. Stories about the people and places and horrors that make this universe the richest science fiction setting ever created. Until next time, remember, the Emperor protects, but a loaded laser gun never hurts.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.